So today we're looking at the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, particularly Job. We'll go on and look at Proverbs and Ecclesiastes in another lesson, mainly the book of Job. These three books are called wisdom literature. Look at this. Proverbs tells you that if you do the right thing, you'll be blessed. If you do the wrong thing, you won't. If you do the wrong thing, then blessings won't follow. The book of Job tells us that it's way more complex than that. And maybe we should just humbly come before God and admit that. And then Ecclesiastes in the middle tells us that, and there is a whole teaching out there that whatever you do, it'll be meaningless, and you should take that into account. And these three books together balance each other. That is, you can read lots of Job and lots of Ecclesiastes, but when it comes back to it, you probably need lots of Proverbs. Do the right thing, get your assignments in, study hard, because in actual fact, Proverbs is right. Most of the time, life does work out according to the patterns that God has put into place. But at the same time, Ecclesiastes and Job are true. Everything's meaningless and things can be ironic. So on the basis of various experiences of life, three wisdom books have been written. One of them, Proverbs, tells us that this is what you need for a heart and mind and right conduct that'll cause you to flourish and be successful. Book of Proverbs. However, the other two books give us further education that tell us, despite all this, there's an element of meaninglessness and there's an element of irony to what happens in life. All three books focus on the application of observation of the natural world. You could call this natural theology. That is, if you observe the world well, you can learn a great deal of what happens in life, but at the same time, there's much of what happens in life that's invisible, that's eternal, that's in God's realm, that we need to have faith to see that. All three books seek to develop a sense of order and understanding of the human life journey through observing what is out there. However, they do offer slightly different answers, and it's good to balance them one with another. Observations of human experience are seen as a basis for understanding life, even God and theology. But despite all three, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job, having confidence that the natural world is ordered, they come up with different perspectives on order of the natural world. So another time we'll look at Proverbs, which says that, like Psalm 1, you'll flourish and prosper when you do the right thing. So I encourage you, do the right thing. However, Ecclesiastes will remind you that sometimes, despite that, everything will seem empty. And the book of Job reminds us that it can in fact be the opposite to what happens in life. Your worst experiences can be your best experiences your worst. Isn't that, you go camping and it pours with rain, and I know my wife and I decided to go down to the Gold Coast and buy a pizza, and we still remember that as a wonderful moment. Hot pizza under a little awning while it was pouring with rain. It's amazing how wonderful the worst experiences of life can be. So the book of Job reminds us of these things. The wisdom literatures could be linked with the royal courts of the Hebrew kings. They could also be linked with the laws of Sinai in the book of Deuteronomy, and they can be linked also with psychology, understanding human nature, and philosophy. What's the nature of reality all around us? Proverbs presents the thesis that there's a strong connection between wise behavior and successful life, and foolish actions and foolish speech result in negative consequences. However, Ecclesiastes and Job tell us it doesn't always unfold like that. Proverbs tells us that laziness normally leads to poverty. However, some people might have other reasons for being more restful. I saw a card the other day on cats, and it said, cats are not the devil's children. They are, in fact, Zen masters who've mastered the secret of life. Now, that may or may not be true. But and so the natural world all around us tells us something about the world. But then again, we need to think more deeply. Is it true or not true. The biblical story of Joseph is a key one. The biblical story of Esther is another. And each of the books of the Old Testament can have passages that remind us of the truths of Proverbs, but also the challenges of Ecclesiastes and also Job. In Ecclesiastes, we have a first teacher followed by his quoting of a second teacher who is talking about irony. And then the first teacher comes back in and says, now reflect on this. The best thing you can do is to give honor to God. Ecclesiastes 7:15 to 18. In my vain life, where everything is meaningless, I've seen everything. Righteous people perish, wicked people do well. Do not be too righteous. Don't spend your whole life trying to be perfect, but don't be too foolish either. It's good that you should take hold of the truths of life in order that you might flourish and do well. Under the sun, the race is not to the fastest, or the battle to the strongest, or the bread to the wisest, or the richest to the most intelligent, or favour to the most skillful. Time and chance happen to all of us. No one can anticipate the best times or the worst times. Like a fish taken in a cruel net, like a bird caught in a snare, we all have times of calamity, or we all have times where things go well. So we're going to look at the book of Job. And one of the things that we should remember, the book of Job can have good Proverbs wisdom all the way through, showing do the right thing, it'll go well. Show grace, love, and forgiveness. Share that with others because God shows grace, love, and forgiveness to us. Recognize the importance of freedom, agency, and growth, and the power of God and prayer. Can I just mention again, Soren Kierkegaard says that you need to understand irony if you're going to flourish in life. Realize things won't always be as you expect. Some things will be much, much better than you expect, and some things will be much, much worse than you expect. Life is ironic. Don't get upset at it. Also, Soren Kierkegaard says, when you understand the ironies of life, it encourages you to be more subjective. One of the things that we tell you at university and tertiary college is be objective. Measure everything, weigh up the evidence, and don't hand in any assignments unless it's fully filled with lots of evidence and quotes. Soren Kierkegaard says the opposite. He says, be subjective, recognize the value of the subjective, express your opinions. After all, you are the only you that you have. This is the only opportunity in life you have to express yourself. So express yourself, do your thing. When it comes to an assignment, be brave at times. You could rise to great heights with your original thoughts, or you go down in the other direction, but be original at times, back yourself. And so irony, says Soren Kierkegaard, is a reminder that you are a free choosing agent who has incredible value and worth. Then do express your view. And I think the solution is be 50% very disciplined and objective with evidence, but also maybe somewhere up to 50% express yourself, find your voice, and express your view as well. Remember the power of God, remember the power of prayer, the value of mystery, the complexity of life, and the value of observing the natural world in order to find out what life and the world is all about. Remember the value of dialogue, Socratic dialogue, because the book of Job has much in it that builds on Socratic dialogue. So let's have a look at the book of Job. It's got a clear literary design. So if you can turn to the book of Job in Job chapter 1, let's have a look at some of the words of Job chapter 1. And so if we go to the text of Job, and so let's go back to Job chapter 1, verse 1. So there's a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. Now notice he's not really being specified as a Hebrew person, and he's blessed. He's got 7 sons, 3 daughters. That's ironic. And his substance, he's got 7,000 sheep, he's got 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen. So he's been blessed. So I think that's the major point at the beginning. And then in chapter 1, verse 6, can you tell me what situation is this from the little bit of reading that you have done? Maybe Abby, any thoughts in Job chapter 1, verse 6? What's this a little bit like? And while you're looking that up, Matthew chapter 1, verse 6, this is a little bit like what sort of situation?
Sorry, like a courtroom?
Yes. Thoughts here in class? What sort of situation do you think this is a little bit like? Yeah. Tell us a bit more about your thoughts, Matthew.
Well, yeah, you've got Satan basically coming to God and saying that the only reason why Job is a good guy is because you've blessed him. Let's take, and it's almost like they have a bet in the end, where it's like, hey, God says, all right, well, I'll take all my blessing away, and you go your best with him, and I think in the end it's kind of like, I don't know whether it's open-ended or whether God says no, he'll be right.
Yeah. Now, love what you said too, Matthew, about a court scene. So can you all see that it's a little bit like a court scene? Now, let me give you a couple of background context. The first one is that it's a bit like a council in heaven. So every organisation and school is run by a council that meets together and makes decisions. And so here's the big decision-making council. And Matthew, you raised the point before, is this literature or is this actual history? And it can be either or both. So this could actually take place. That is, God may have a courtroom gathering of people, or it could be a literary device like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, like C.S. Lewis. So we assume that C.S. Lewis doesn't have people who go through the back of a wardrobe and end up in Narnia, that is a story. We assume that's the case. Now, this could be either, or it could be both. And I think there's a little bit of truth in every bit of literature, and there's lots of literature in every description of truth. So this is an account in heaven. One of the things that we could be aware of is that the word Satan or Satan could in fact mean adversary, and it could mean different things to a medieval there. Have you come across this idea before, that Satan can mean different things?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, when I read it, it was more just the fact that Satan is presenting himself to God as well. Which to me either means that now points to the fact that they obviously just outside of time and knowledge, in which there was no reason Satan actually being taken up into God. Because like he's having somebody with God, and I don't think, like theologically, I don't think that's something that we consider would happen.
Yeah.
Just like them having conversation with God, whereas it didn't grow, and Satan's like just walking around the earth.
Yeah, and so we have to be careful that we don't get characters confused with other ways of describing the characters. You can read novels where you bring your idea of a character, Jekyll and Hyde or Frankenstein or whatever. We often bring our idea into what a character is and how they're to be described. Now, when it comes to the trial scene, let me remind you that in ancient Egypt, it was the belief that at the end of life, your heart would have an opportunity to speak. So they'd take your heart for the 42 gods, and then your spirit would also have an opportunity to speak. And then your spirit would be weighed against a feather. And if you were found to be full of sin, then you wouldn't make it, you'd be gone. So this is Egypt, but other ancient places also thought that you would stand before divine judges at the end of life. And the Book of the Dead, the Hebrew Book of the Dead, describes some of the things that would happen in the weighing of the heart and also in the weighing of the spirit and your soul as to whether you have led a good life. And I think in some ways our society has lost this idea that your life is weighed at the end of life. And it's a bit intriguing the way we've lost that. Abby, do you have any thoughts on the way we've lost this idea that after you die and pass away, that your life would be weighed in some way? And possibly between the 1800s and 1850s and today, that concept that your life will be measured at the end of your life and weighed up has been lost. Any thoughts, Abby?
Oh, that's really interesting. I'd say certainly that it's not as prominent. People just don't like to think about death and what comes after, which is funny because we spend more time being dead than we ever have been alive.
Yes.
I'd say I worked with a whole lot of non-Christian people last year, and I got a really good chance to speak to them about what they thought about death. And I think there's some idea of like, oh, if you live a good life, you know, good things will happen after you die. But I don't think anyone really, at least the people I have had experience with, just don't think about it very deeply.
And as you say, think about the number of years that we live alive, which might be 90 years, and then think about the number of years that we'll live dead in one sense. And it's hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of years. And so we need to value both, in that your 90 years is important, but also the years outside life are also important. And we've lost that, as you say. People don't think about death at the moment. Any thoughts in class on this? And they used to think that you could weigh life up a little bit, didn't they? Yeah.
I just like agree with what Abby was saying. I think people don't like to think about this nowadays. I think it's not something that happens naturally. To the point where people are afraid of dying, even though it's really good that we get.
Yes. Yeah, and medicine helps develop that idea. We must do all we can to help people. Though often people in the last 6 months of their life feel as though, hang on, I don't want all these things you're trying to do. Because we've got the 20 and 30-year-olds telling the 80-year-olds, you should be hanging on here. And yeah.
I think when I think of my pop, he's not afraid of dying. He doesn't. He knows he's going to die. Not
Yeah. Yeah.
Things like that fear of death only really give up until that certain age, and then you realise that you've lived a life, you know, and if you have an idea of like salvation, it's really not that bad.
Yeah. And I think the irony and the humour that surrounds this tells us that life and death are far more complex. That is, life can have great moments and sad moments. One of the things I noticed in Job is that a few times he talks about it's almost suicide. You know, he wants to exit this world. But life and death are more complex. And so we touch on all of those areas here. And so chapter 1, verse 6 is a little bit like the council in heaven is a little bit like the end of life, judging of your life. And one of the things that I think is happening in Job is that the trials of life give you a pre-death judge on how your life has gone. And so when you get a bit ill and you get closer to death, it's a chance to reflect on what has my life been and how has it measured up. And I remember one person who almost died came and saw me, and he was going to get a computer and he was going to go and study and he was going to do all the things that he had never done in his life because he'd had this sudden realization from that near-death experience as to what it's about. And I think there's a little bit of that going on in the book of Job, and that the council in heaven is a little bit like the council that takes place at the end of your life when you weigh up all of those things. The other interesting parallel here is that the troubles that come upon Job are a little bit like Ezekiel 14, where the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel saying, if a country sins and is unfaithful, then these troubles will come. And then Noah, Daniel, and Job are going to stand up and say, we were righteous and we got blessed despite the troubles. So Noah, there was a great flood, but he was righteous and God preserved him. Daniel, there's great trials that he faced, lions and fire, but he is preserved. And then Job, here we find he faces great troubles, but he is preserved. And Ezekiel reminds us that God allows war to come, he allows plague to come, he allows COVID to come. He allows all of these things, famine can come, wild animals can come. And in the book of Job, you've got wild animals as well. And so God allows that. Now, this reminds me of the book of Revelation that we'll look at in a couple of weeks' time, because here we've got the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And again, God allows sword and famine and death and wild beasts. This reminds us that there's literary parallels there. And I'm reminded too that we as humans can avoid war a little bit. That is, we can organise ourselves in a bit of politics to avoid war. Did you know there was a Christian elected to be president of the US in Jimmy Carter? And after, he only lasted about a term, and then he lost his job. And he thought, what am I going to do? And he started making chairs. And then his wife says, look, you've made too many wooden chairs. You need to do something a little bit different. He thought, I'll go over to North Korea and see if I can make world peace. So he went over there and he spent about a week over there talking with the North Korean leader saying, look, you need to be more peaceful. And then he said, oh, you should stay over the weekend. And he said, no, I teach Sunday school on the weekend. I've got to get back to the US to teach Sunday school. So I thought the ironies and parallels between making world peace and then, And so I think there's a little bit of these huge pressures going on in Job, where there's famine, disease, natural disaster. And we see it in the book of Ezekiel, we see it in the book of Revelation. But these are huge questions about life as well, as to what can we do to help avoid war? And there's all sorts of wars take place. What can we avoid to do to help avoid famine? And now we've got global warming. All of these things are huge questions. But the book of Job gives us a different perspective, which says that it's complex, it's big, God's at work. Pray more, maybe praise more. So Job chapter 1, we've got he's a good man. And then Job chapter 6, the heavenly beings have their discussion, and then Satana comes down. And then verse 10 is a key. I've put a fence around him and his house and all that he has, and he'll be blessed. We do this with children, don't we? We put fences around them. And down in Victoria, when I was down there, I remember that they didn't want trees or rocks or anything like that. And they just wanted fences around the preschools because children could injure themselves. And then they came up with this idea that maybe it would be good to have trees and rocks and maybe even get them to play with a pocket knife and things like that. And so now they've got this whole natural, live in nature sort of thing going on, which is entirely the opposite. And so, but sometimes we want a fence around people to protect us, but at times we also want the fence taken away so people can explore what life is all about. And that's part of the challenge of parenthood and teaching, is to give people sufficient fences, but at the same time. So anyway, chapter 1, verse 14, the oxen were ploughing, and then the Sabaeans came by and carried them all off and killed your servants. And then a fire came from heaven and wiped it all out. And then the Chaldeans came marching over and they raided and carted everything off. And then a wind came, blew everything away. And now your sons and daughters who were young are now dead. And Job said, that's okay. Naked I came into my mother's womb, verse 21 of chapter 1. Naked I will return. And so one's pastoral strategy, which Job is able to use, is simply to say, I accept, I didn't have much, now I've been blessed, and if I've not got much, acceptance. So that's a pastoral strategy there. And so can you use chapter 1, verse 22 as a verse 21 as a pastoral strategy? Count your blessings, or is that? Notice later on his friends will sit with him for a week, so that's another pastoral strategy. Silence. Matthew, any thoughts on how do you help someone who's lost a lot and feeling very sad for themselves?
I was just thinking about the 5 phases of grief or something.
Yeah, Elizabeth Kubler Ross. That's worth noting. Yeah.
And look, in the end, once you go through those 5 cycles, which I can't remember what they are, but I know the last one is acceptance. You get there in the end.
Yeah. So the 5 stages of grief by Elizabeth Kubler Ross. Now, her argument was that you can go through them. A lot of people disagree with this, and they actually, a lot of people would say that people go through very different stages for different reasons. And I think there's a weakness in the Kubler Ross. So Kubler Ross says you find out that you've got COVID or something, and the first stage is you deny it. I should have got the vaccine, I didn't. Now they tell me I've got COVID. Maybe I haven't. Maybe they've got a misdiagnosis. And then the next stage is anger. Why didn't they tell me? Why didn't I get the injection or whatever? And then the next stage, bargaining. Perhaps, what if I go and work it out or do something? And then the next stage, says Kubler Ross, hopeless. I just feel sad about it all. And then Kubler Ross says she found that the people in old people's homes were happiest when they accepted where they were. What do you think of, in class first, what do you think of Kubler Ross's 5 stages? Do you think it likely people go through 5 stages when they face grief? Yeah. So, yeah. Yep. 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 Yeah. 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 I think one of the complexities is that you can carry some of the first or second stages right through even 10 years, 20 years later. So even though you've accepted, you can still have anger there. And so I think maybe you carry more than one stage and don't go completely through it. So that's one weakness. Abby, your thoughts on the 5 stages of Kubler Ross?
Yeah, I know that just going back a little bit to the Bible verse there as well.
Yes.
Just with my experience being a pastor's kid and seeing my father at funerals, and especially in the case when, say, someone's child has died, I think sometimes hearing, oh, God giveth and God taketh away, I don't think that's what they need right at that moment. And so with the 5 stages of grief, I think like there is some merit in them, but it's important to take one step at a time. Like you can't do the final step right at the beginning. And often I think people jump straight to, oh, count your blessings, God does purposes. And maybe that's not what they need to hear at that point, maybe at one point. But I think people do mix up the steps.
Yeah, very well said, Abby. So what you've said, from my understanding, is that don't expect everyone to rush to the 5th stage of acceptance. Give them lots of space and allow them to choose whichever stage they feel that they want to express. And so with the anger stage, so is that your thought, Abby? Yep.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So if they want to express anger, then give them 20 minutes. Yeah, I am angry. And the Psalms give us permission for this lamenting and saying, I am angry. Why wasn't this done? As Christians, I think then sometimes we can help them land that anger in various ways. And so maybe we could pray together, or if you thought of some other ways to look at this. We don't want to lecture them on the solutions, but we do at times find it useful to give them a sense of help to help them find a solution. I remember someone rang me up and said there's this person who got involved with drugs, then used the work boss money to buy the drugs, got fired, got thrown in jail. His wife was so upset with him that she left and took the kids. And after 6 months, he got out of jail. And this lady said, I'm going to send him up to you, Pastor Sam, so you can talk to him and fix him up. And he came up and he sat down and he was sad. I mean, he was so low, he could have walked under a gnat's toenail. He was really feeling bad. And then I said, as he was on his way, I prayed about it and I thought, sometimes God can give us a vision of hope. And I said to him, have you thought about what your life could be like if you managed to pull your life together a bit, showed your former boss, showed your wife that you were working on pulling your life together. Suddenly you got a glimpse of it, of what his life could be and the hope that he could have. And he leapt up, he started dancing around, he got super excited because he got a glimpse of what a better life could be, what a better person could be. And so I think people can get these glimpses, whatever stage they're at, they can get a hope-filled glimpse. But on Monday, Tuesday, they might slip back a bit, but then they can get a hope-filled glimpse again. And so I think having scripture, having various areas to help us can also all be useful in pastoral care, but at the same time, we shouldn't rush people if whatever stage they're at. So here we find in chapter 1 and 2, Job is facing great difficulties. And then the book begins with Job lamenting. And after the tragedies of his life, he begins to describe in chapter 3 the lament. And we've talked in a previous lesson in Psalms about the value of lament. And Job begins in chapter 3, verse 3, let the day perish where I was born. And so there's an artistic irony in birth and light and tragedy and darkness, isn't there? And artists and writers often wrestle with this tension. You read Joseph Conrad, Out of Africa and Heart of Africa, Darkness. It reflects on this tension between light and darkness. And every day has maybe 12 hours of darkness and 12 hours of light. And that tells us something about the journey of life, is that you do have these turnings. And here in chapter 3, we have Job lamenting. Verse 11, why didn't I die in the womb? Why did I have to come and be born and live this life where I can see all of these troubles there? And so if you want a good lament psalm, then chapter 3 is there. Notice that it is a poetry, and often we have parallelisms that we have spoken about before. 3 verse 19, the small and great are there, the servant is free from his master. Verse 18, the prisoner rest together, they hear not the voice of the oppressor. So you need to know something of poetry and parallelism to read the book of Job well. You need to know something of irony, how irony is not just a play on words, but irony is a way of seeking deeper truths where there are contradictions that don't exactly work out. And there's lots of other literary devices here, plots and character in the book of Job as well. And so we're not saying it's 100% not literally true, but we are saying that it has literary elements to it, and that understanding these literary elements not only helps us to understand the book of Job, it helps us to understand the journey of life and helps us to understand the benefits of literature in understanding the journey of life. So after our short break, about 5 minutes or so, we'll come back and have a look at some of the pastoral counsel that is offered to Job by his friends. 3 friends come along and then a 4th friend. And we can reflect there on what sort of pastoral counsel would you offer or do you offer when people are going through suffering and difficulty. So let's maybe take a 5 to 7 minute break now at this point, 11:30. See you shortly. Sounds good. So a coffee break.